is on display across the sky from day to day, night to night. I can't help but look around and wonder why it took so long for me to find. 'Cause beauty's unfolding all around us, even as the sun goes down. The heavens are singing mysteries and wonders. Listen, you'll hear that sound. I'm listening now.
Hey, welcome to the Not So Late Night. This is our first online gathering as InterVarsity Fellowships since last May when we met for Mark Nest. What a whirlwind this year has been. So many unexpected challenges, obstacles, and reasons for concern. Sometimes our best accomplishments are just getting through each day. But we're gathering tonight during what we like to call the streamable hours. You know what we're talking about. When the distance education and the Zoom meetings for the day are all over, and Netflix and the comfy couch call your name, escape and unwind. But tonight, we're hoping to interrupt your streamable hours with something different. Not something to escape into, but something to lift our spirits and lift our gaze. Something to shift our perspective from the worries of our days to something more promising, more joyful, and more life-giving. We've got some worship led by Adriana and Joy from UNBC, some good words from our friends Amy and Matt, and an invitation to end your day in Examen with God. But first, some words from our sponsors.
Welcome to InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in Garrett College. During this time, it is amazing. Say hi, everyone. Hello.
Hello.
Clap.
Go.
Shall we have breakfast together?
The bunny, the bunny, the bunny. Oh, I love. Wait, what do I love? The bunny. Oh.
Hey, yo, we're at UNBC.
We're a little group called InterVarsity.
We follow Jesus Christ and all are welcome.
Even if you think of God very seldom.
Serving our campus and knowing our Creator.
Even in COVID, you're called to something greater.
Check out our studies, our games, and our crew.
We would consider it an honor to get to know you.
Word.
My heart to sing thy praise, stream
Here I raise my
Wow, 2020. What a year, right? I think for years to come, each one of us can give a list of things in our life that were hard, stressful, or needed to change because of the impact COVID had. For some of you, perhaps you're finishing your degree on a not so ideal semester. Others, it is a really depressing start of your first year at university. Maybe you've had COVID or know someone who still has symptoms. But for me, COVID almost took away my wedding. But before I jump right into that, let me paint you a picture. First of all, you should know, growing up, I was never someone who made Pinterest boards for my dream wedding. When I was younger, I liked climbing trees to pick fruit and collecting little snails from my community playground in order to breed them in my makeshift 2-liter soda terrarium. In short, I was kind of awkward and weird. When my boyfriend and I got engaged at the beginning of 2019, we never thought that COVID would greatly impact our wedding in July. In the beginning, we made this vision together of having a gorgeous outdoor wedding with 130 of our close friends and family, enjoying the blue prairie sky and delicious summer heat. There would be charcuterie, there would be games, there would be dancing. However, as the months rolled on and restrictions continued to tighten around us, we found ourselves having to change. Okay, not 130 people, maybe 10. Okay, not outdoors in the garden, maybe in the backyard. With each disappointment, I found myself having to pivot and make new plans. However, one change in particular broke me, and that was the possibility of not having my parents make my wedding, which also meant not having my dad walk me down the aisle. You see, about 2 months out from my wedding in Manitoba, at that time, there was a strict 2-week quarantine for anyone coming from outside of the province. And so my working parents, who would be coming in from BC, wouldn't have the time to quarantine. As someone who has a good relationship with their parents, this was absolutely devastating. Although I have no specific picture of what my wedding looked like, one thing that was always unquestionable was my parents making the wedding. And in my eyes, other alternatives of my parents and family coming to another wedding ceremony later on, or to a 1 year from now celebration, was not the same because I was getting married the summer of 2019. Amidst all the changes, all the pivots and replanning, the hope of my family being there was gone. The hope that kind of kept me still excited about my wedding day, besides getting married, of course, had died. I was hopeless, and so I cried for hours and with many tissues, until I decided to bring this up in prayer to God. So I took my tired, puffy-eyed self, along with my journal, over to the Assiniboine River. Just before I made it to the river, I ran into my future mother-in-law, and in tears I told her that my parents probably couldn't make the wedding. In sympathy, she hugged me and said, "It's not the wedding day that's the most important, it's the marriage." I took that with me. I sat down on the bench and I journaled in my prayer. In my grief and sorrow, I had come to realize that I had so much hope and excitement placed on my wedding day. But what God was inviting me into was placing my hope in Him. Sure, my wedding day will not be like what I had expected, but God would be with me and my husband. And in the eyes of God, it was Him who will seal my marriage in a covenant. That was what truly mattered. And so as I was praying this to God, He reminded me of a passage from Isaiah 41:10 that says, "Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand." Now, I don't know about you and your situation, but what I do know is that COVID has stripped us of the things we have hoped for or placed our hope on. And perhaps you are like me, and God is inviting you to place your hope in Him instead. I encourage you to do so. I guarantee it is worth it.
Where do you get the energy to persevere and carry on? I don't know if this is a daily question, a monthly, or a much more occasional question. Yet, as we have passed through the second month of lockdown and 11 months since the first case of COVID hit Canada, there can be many moments when it is lonely and we can lose hope that anything will get better. There does seem to be a glimmer of hope with the coming vaccine, but unfortunately, it is not a magic pill. Even after everyone gets vaccinated, there still will be a social, physical, and economic effects that people have to deal with. It can be so easy to dwell upon all the things that we do not have or are not able to do this past year. But what does it mean to continue to have hope in this season? And what is it that we are putting our hope in? It is great to have the scriptures because we can turn to them and find a wealth of characters and see how they react to different situations. There are many people who face difficult situations but continue to have hope. I can think of Noah, Abram, and Joseph, and that is just the ones in Genesis. But let's focus on the story of Joseph, which is a fascinating one. I want to give you a snippet version of the story because it is a quite long story. But I encourage you to take the time over later tonight or tomorrow to read through the story of Joseph. It starts in Genesis 37 and then continues all the way to Genesis 50. I know for many of you this is a very familiar story, but to others, if they know the story at all, they just know the guy who is given a multicolored coat. However, as I give you an overview of this story, I want you to record whether an event is positive or negative. The story starts with a 17-year-old Joseph and his father giving him a multicolored coat because he loves Joseph so much. But this gift represents the fact that his father loves him more than all his brothers. So his brothers detest him for it. Then God reveals a dream to Joseph of his brothers bowing down to him. But as he shares that dream with his brothers, he receives their ire and mock him for thinking they will bow down to him. Later on, his father asks him to go out to his brothers and see how they are doing shepherding the flock. So Joseph does. And because of how he is the favored son by their father, along with the fact that he had dreams of them bowing down to him, his brothers toss him into a pit and then sell him into slavery. But then he is sold to the captain of the guard, Potiphar, and raises to the most prominent position in that household and oversees everything. However, when he increases in position, this garners the attention of Potiphar's wife. And so she tries to sleep with him. And when he doesn't, she accuses him of rape, and he is thrown into jail. But while he is in jail, he rises in responsibility again and is put in charge of all the prisoners. And because of his position there, he was able to hear the dreams of the cupbearer and chief baker and interpret them. But when the cupbearer was released from prison, he forgot about Joseph and what he had done. So Joseph had to spend 2 more years in prison. Then when Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret, the cupbearer was able to remember Joseph, and Joseph was summoned by the Pharaoh to interpret his dream. But this dream said that a famine was coming and that they needed to start preparing for this difficult situation. But thanks to Joseph's interpretation of the dream, Pharaoh promoted him to the second highest rank in all of Egypt, which meant that Joseph was to prepare for the famine. Once the famine hit Joseph's family, they came to Egypt, and the whole family was reunited again. So how was it recording all of those positive and negative events? There's an interesting cyclical nature to this story, in that every time there's a good thing that happens, it leads to a bad thing later on, and vice versa. It is so interwoven that it feels difficult to say whether an event is either good or bad, and maybe it just lives in the nuanced middle between the two. Yet isn't that so much like our lives? It can often be difficult, as I am living in an experience, to know whether this is one of those good memories I will look back fondly of years later, or whether it's just an ordinary moment that will soon be forgotten in the monotony of life. And the same can be said for the difficult moments. Often I am not able to tell until I get the perspective of time. as you go through this story, there's a familiar refrain that shows up, and that is, the Lord was with Joseph. In Hebrew literature, which is the original language of the Old Testament, a literary device that they employ is repetition in the form of repeated words or phrases, sometimes almost verbatim. When words or phrases are repeated, think of them like bolded text. The authors really don't want you to forget it. Like in the same way, you cannot forget the chorus of a song. The chorus of Joseph's life is that the Lord was with him. The difficulties in Joseph's life was not because God had abandoned him. God was with him in those seasons just as much as he was with him in the seasons when he was succeeding. And throughout that, Joseph continued to be faithful to God. And that is what God calls us to. As we go through this season, unknowing of when it will end, there is one thing that we can be confident of. God has not abandoned you. God will walk with you as you go, no matter what kind of season of life you are going through. Yet, as I go through this story of Joseph, there's another thing that jumps out at me. That is the fact that God is using those terrible times to develop Joseph's abilities. It seemed that Joseph had some abilities in supervisory roles because he was the one who was sent by his father to check in on how his brothers were doing. Then, as he went to Egypt, he was brought into the house of Potiphar, where his skills continued to develop. He was given new responsibilities and was able to learn new management skills. Then he was thrown into jail, where he continued to exhibit a propensity to lead. He was able to rise to a position where he was in charge of all the prisoners. God was continuing to develop those skills wherever he went. And then finally, he was able to put all those skills together as he rose to the second highest position in Egypt. He had learned the management skills in order to manage all the people and store grain necessary to prevent people from dying of famine. God was developing the skills that he needed, even in the midst of all those times that he was going through a terrible situation. And I think the last thing that Joseph shows to me is that in the midst of his difficulties, he continues to hold on to the promise that God has shown him. He knows that God has made a promise to him through his dreams. But I can imagine sitting in jail thinking, where has this promise gone? There's no chance that my brothers will come and bow down to me now. I am the lowest of the low. But Joseph continues on and continues to be faithful to God and gives God the glory as he interprets the dreams of the cupbearer and baker. And finally, as he spoke with his brothers, he was able to communicate the message that he was able to live out. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. He was able to hold on to that promise that God had made him many years earlier and come to the point in which it came to fruition. And so what do we learn from this story then? To me, there are many lessons that can be drawn out of this story. The first is that we will all go through many different seasons in our lives. Some of them are very difficult to pass through, while others will feel super easy. But we do not know whether these are the good times or the bad times. It is only as God redeems these times that we will have clarity on what kinds of times they were. Yet here is the fact that we know. God will continue to be growing you in the midst of both hard and good times. He is preparing you for something, and he will develop those skills in you now for those future events. But what we need to be doing now is hoping in God and trusting him during all of these seasons. We need to continue to be listening to him. So as I wrap up, I want you to think about your life during COVID. I am sure that there have been a bunch of times that have been really hard. But how have you been making sure that your hope continues to remain in God? Are there things that God has said to you in the past that you have forgotten about or ignored? What does it look like to hold on to those truths during this season? It is not easy to continue to place your hope in God because there are very real hardships and they hurt. And I do not want to diminish those things, but God remains good in the midst of both the suffering times as well as all of the joyous times. So continue to place your hope in the only one that is steady and unchanging in these tumultuous times.
Before we jump into Examen to end the program, here are some helpful announcements. On January 31st, there's going to be an online leadership training time entitled Growing Influence. Leadership has often been tied to position, status, and power. But how might we steward all that we have and are so our leadership and influence flows out of who God has made us to be? Join us on the last Sunday of each month as various staff lead us through recognizing our unique voices and how God might be calling us to use them in our specific contexts. This is open to any student in current leadership roles, considering future leadership roles, or are interested in growing their influence. It's free, and you can register at ivcf.ca/ivcf-bc. We're also hoping to host more of these not-so-late nights this year. Would you like to help us? We're looking for students who want to help with study music, worship, teaching, graphic design, and more. You can email dstone@ivcf.ca if you want to help make the next one on February 28th. And with that, here's a final word from our sponsors before we end the night and Examen.
So I'm bored in the house and I'm in the house bored in the oh hey, I didn't see you there. Did you ever notice that since the pandemic it's been so hard to fall asleep, and when you're trying to rest you feel stressed all the time? Well, if it's any consolation, I feel the same too. Here's a hug for you and for my friend Sam here. So I found out recently that my friend, this nice lady here's friend Bryn, is leading a course called Faith, Grief, and COVID to talk about lamentation. I'll be there. Join me.
Tell me about the Psalms module without telling me about the Psalms module.
We have questions about faith, sexuality, and gender, and we know that we're not the only ones.
We felt the need for a safe space to have these conversations, and that's what we're hoping for these weekly sessions.
We're super excited to continue these conversations.
And we would love for you to join us on Thursdays at noon.
See you then.
We use our phones too much, stream too many TV shows, scroll through people's curated versions of themselves too often. But why does that matter? What does this do to our souls? The Catholic writer Ronald Rolheiser shares his insight into the answer. We, for every kind of reason, good and bad, are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. It is not that we have anything against God, depth, and the Spirit. We would like these. It is just that we are habitually too preoccupied to have any of these show up on our radar screens. Pathological busyness, distraction, and restlessness are major blocks today within our spiritual lives. Distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. Quite the statement. But it makes sense to me. I mean, if we are constantly taking in content from thousands of different voices each day, but neglecting God's voice, of course our spiritual lives will suffer. There's no room for it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Derek, and one of the last things we're going to do this evening is a prayer together called the Examen prayer. The Examen prayer, a fuller name of it is the examination of conscience. It's a way of becoming aware of God's presence in our lives, where He was in all the peoples and events of our days. You can do an Examen prayer over a day. It's typically done daily, but you can also do it over weeks or seasons of your life. So I think I'm going to invite us to do this Examen prayer the past week, kind of starting this semester. We want to look back at this week and observe, where was God? Where was I present to Him? Where was I distant? So let's take this opportunity to examine ourselves together and become aware of how God has moved in us this week. I will prompt us kind of with each movement of the prayer as we go through it. So to begin in the introduction, it's really simple. We're going to spend a minute becoming aware of the love with which God looks upon us as we begin this examen. Spend a minute under the gracious gaze of Jesus. Say, Jesus, I love you. Hear Him echo His love to you in return. The next movement is gratitude. We want to remember all the blessings of this week. Reflect back and thank God for all of the good things and moments that have happened, and all of the gifts you have received. Write them down or just reflect. The next part is petition. This is asking Jesus for the grace to see what he wants you to see. Ask Jesus for the grace of self-knowing and for his wisdom and perspective in your life. Next, we move on to discernment. This is the largest part of the examen, where we'll spend the most time, about 8 or 9 minutes. Review your week with the Father and ask him to help you realize when you were with God and when you were moving away from God's love. Go through the week day by day. Where were your emotions stirred? Where were you wounded? Where did you experience joy? Where did you experience despair? Where did you find it easy to engage with Jesus? Where did you find it difficult? Share these moments with Jesus and ask him to provide insight, guidance, and wisdom. Allow God to bring moments to the surface, and as a moment rises to the surface, choose 1 or 2 of these moments to journal and reflect more deeply upon. forgiveness. Take a moment to call to mind your sins in the presence of the Father who loves you unconditionally. Admit anything you are sorry for and experience His mercy. Share these things with God and trust in His grace for you. Next, make a resolution. With the Lord, make some practical, concrete, and doable resolution for the rest of the week. What is one resolution you can make with Jesus in this moment? How does He want to send you into the rest of this week? Conclusion. Take a moment and just enjoy being with God. As you rest with Him, look forward with hope and joyful anticipation to tomorrow and the rest of your week, knowing that God is with you in all that you do and you can truly find God in all things. That's the Examen prayer. Thank you for praying with us. May you go into this night full of the grace and peace of God and knowing that you are under His loving gaze. Peace to you.